One of the reasons I did this interview is because I admire your spirit.
Oh,
I
that's so kind.
admire so much that you follow your dreams no matter what's being said to you. I'm curious, how many people thought you were crazy with this idea? How many people said, Steve, this isn't going to happen? My next guest is the embodiment of the American dream. Steve Brandt has created the Route 66 Spirit of America Museum right on Route 66. Stay tuned for an exciting program.
You are watching Profunda TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
Our, pro- our program is global. I have viewers from all around the world.
Ah,
Not everybody knows where Route 66 is. So, can
okay.
you give us, I'll date myself and say I used to watch the television show,
As did
Route,
I.
yeah, Route
Yes.
66. But that's about all I know. So, if you said to
Well,
me, where does it start and where does it end? I
well,
don't necessarily know.
that's a great question. So we are about to hit the 100-year birthday of Route 66. So if you can imagine, in 1926, there was no cross-country road unless it was like dirt trails and things that once upon a time were used by the wagon trains. There were ways to get across country, but nothing solid enough to actually be designated an official, government recognized road. And I'm not going to claim I'm a total historian. I just know that it was 99 years ago that they built this road from Chicago to Los Angeles, and um, it's a tremendous piece of not just history, but of what I liked again in the museum. It's the first time ever. It was the first time ever we did this. It's like when Abraham Lincoln was dealing with the Civil War, you would think he had his hands full, but he had the presence of mind to authorize the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. So we didn't have a railroad that went across the country until Abraham Lincoln said, okay, this is important. We didn't have a road that for cars until Route 66 in 1926. So if you go to Chicago, you can start heading west. And one other little reference point that people all over the world might be familiar with, the movie version of Grapes of Wrath. That was Henry Fonda and a lot of great storytelling of the American experience, because another bit of Route 66's legacy is giving people a chance to get someplace new, again, easier than being on a dirt road. And people during the Great Depression took advantage of there being this road, which was actually fairly new during the Great Depression, to get themselves out of difficult circumstances and find a better life. And in the Grapes of Wrath film, that's what they're doing. They're working to get themselves to California. So it's it's fun to think that next year we will celebrate a road that is not just the first time ever, but it also was about finding a better life. And I want to help people find a better life personally. The museum exists to give people, again, inspiring stories, people who followed their dreams. Um, some of them didn't quite achieve them. I'm a car guy, and I used to watch on ABC's Wide World of Sports these guys at the Bonneville Salt Flats trying to be the fastest man on wheels. And there was a man named Craig Breedlove, and his dream was to break the sound barrier on land. And he kept building one car after another because the cars weren't fast enough. And I've got replicas of three of them here in the museum, little scale models. And he actually never made it to the sound barrier, but he didn't, but it wasn't for lack of trying. He just kept going at it. And eventually it was like, well, not quite sure. I think he might have run out of money. That can, that can be an issue. But but never giving up until, circumstances are insurmountable. And frankly, well, we've got some circumstances that we need to push through today, and not only in honor of Route 66 turning 100, but in honor of America turning 250 next year. We want people to be able to achieve the American dream of the founding fathers, which is life, liberty, and happiness for all, with no one left out. I'm not going to say the founding fathers had it all figured out. That's why it's also called the American experiment. They set this experiment in motion, and they began with a document, the Constitution, and they said, we're not so smart that we think it's perfect. We're going to allow people to amend it when they've figured out something new needs to be added to this guiding document. We'll let them do that. So, little things like letting women vote, that got added in. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it's part of the process.
I'm coming back to the museum just for a
Yes,
moment.
please.
Because I have, as a reporter, I have covered museums for many, many years. And one of the difficult parts of museum life is the whole conversation of what gets in and what doesn't get in. So how do you select what's on your walls and what's in your showcases?
Wow, great question, because if you looked at the museum when it opened in 2023, it doesn't look the same today, except the front room. Even the side front room has been turned from more of a library reading room into a podcast room. I took out the couch and I put in a nice table and 4 chairs, and every month now I do a podcast with a local friend who's a professional storyteller named Marilyn Hudson. And in the main room, I removed some exhibits that really weren't telling the story as well as I wanted them to. And I've now got a whole area focused on a lot of things happening in the 1960s. I mean, there's a special space program exhibit, and that, of course, was in the 1960s because it's focused on when we went to the moon. But in another corner of the main room, I pay tribute to Woodstock and the difficulties we had in the 1960s as represented by the film Easy Rider, and then the civil rights movement with a large number of books and photos related to not just Dr. King's work, but other people as well. And then there's a tribute to Fred Rogers, who kicked off Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in the 1960s. I wasn't aware that he was in the 1960s as his starting point also. And then there's a man who was really big in the 1960s, but I don't think people talk about him much today, and that's Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was so well known that the US government hired him to design the pavilion for the World's Fair in Montreal, Canada in 1967. So if you were at the World's Fair, you saw this huge geodesic dome with all these exhibits and structures inside. And that was the US government saying, hey, Bucky, we need something that really will grab people's attention. We'd like your dome structure to be the focal point of our pavilion. And even towards the end of his life, literally 1983, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Ronald Reagan. And I recently showed a clip from that event as part of a talk I gave last month now at the Oklahoma Museums Association annual conference. It's so inspiring to see that he was known. And it's just like, well, we need to get him back. And that's another part of the museum's mission, is not just to celebrate people who went as far as they could, but to celebrate people whose work can help us today, even if they themselves are no longer here to champion it. There's always YouTube.
I had
Sorry.
an interview with Buckminster Fuller, and one of my favorite things that he said many things, but I was always a fan of, space, the final frontier kind of thing. And
Sure.
he would say, "This is space." That was his favorite thing. We were all making a distinction about leaving Earth and going into space, but he would
Oh,
always stand firm, "This is space." And I loved it. It changed my perspective completely.
I'm so happy to hear you got to talk to him, because I first knew of your interest in somewhat the same subject because you interviewed Dr. Russell Akoff, who was my mentor for 10 years and worked with Buckminster Fuller on the project called The World Game. And if I can succeed as the museum evolves, one of its offerings will be a version of the World Game, uh, hopefully run in Stroud through our local high school. Okay. Okay.
What is the world game?
So, so Russ Akoff was working with Buckminster Fuller on the World Game, which is a social science laboratory experiment where you gather people together, and instead of a science experiment with chemicals being mixed, it's a social science experiment with people being mixed. And by that, I mean they are put literally on a map of the world that's as big as a basketball court, so they can stand on planet Earth, or spaceship Earth, as Bucky liked to call it. And then over 4 hours, his instructions are, okay, talk amongst yourselves, come up with some collaborative solutions that represent strategies for moving forward towards the end dream of everybody on the planet having all their basic needs met: food, housing, education, whatever he didn't want us to live in a scarcity mindset, because he knew that science had evolved to the point where we actually could feed, clothe, house, and educate everybody. We're just not organized to do it because we don't think it's possible. This is like the classic innovator's dilemma. An innovator knows something is now possible, nobody else does. So how does he educate enough of the population so that his innovation becomes something that's actually adopted? Otherwise, it just sits on a shelf, and it may be super powerful, but unless it's well known enough to be used, it just kind of, well, wastes away. So Buckminster Fuller wanted people to have this worldview breakthrough, and he would give them the basics at the beginning so that they would understand this is what you have to figure out how to do. How do we stop thinking in scarcity terms and start thinking in collaboration based sufficiency, or possibly even abundance terms? It was a big challenge, but he was, of course, super optimistic himself. And in a clip I've shown people, he actually had Buzz Aldrin, one of the first men on the moon, playing the World Game. This was back around 1980, I believe. So not
Well,
bad.
to make you feel even more inspired, I
Please.
have a favorite writer named Jane McGonigal, and
Okay.
she gave a TED talk years ago about the importance of gamers in the world. And
Oh,
her theory is that the gaming population could solve the world's problems if we
oh,
put the gamers together and made them solve problems. It's very much a spin-off of Bucky's idea.
wow.
Just saying that there are people playing games all around the planet on
Wow.
virtual machines, but in fact, they are problem solvers by nature. So if we give them the problems to solve, we might actually get answers. I'm not sure everyone heard her. I know I was inspired by that. And she's
That's wonderful.
absolutely a genius, Jane McGonigal.
I
So
would love to get a link to that talk from you.
I will send
And
that to you.
and
So,
and
but let's come back to your museum.
sure.
So I would say that inspiration is an important part of your makeup. So what will inspire a young person who walks in your doors? What will they what will make their eyes light up in your view?
Well, that's a fun question because I want people to be kind of surprised. And there's two kinds of surprises. One is the work of Buckminster Fuller and Russell Ackoff, and also W. Edwards Deming. And the last person I've been talking about lately is Dr. Stephen Covey of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People fame. And I want people to see this option that they may not feel that a better future where we work together instead of fighting is possible. But I want them to see that these pioneers knew that we could make that leap. Now, that's an intellectual aha that I offer people. But for them to have a more fun experience, I actually have a new tribute recently installed where I celebrate the Star Wars world, because the light side of the Force versus the dark side of the Force is a nice metaphor for the struggle we're in today. So if you go into this particular room, it's actually the middle room, you've got quarter scale statues of Luke Skywalker when he was a farm boy, before he met Obi-Wan. Then you got Obi-Wan Kenobi, but then you've got a half scale animatronic Yoda, and you can ask Yoda questions and he answers them. This was a real find for a guy who wanted people to have not just, again, intellectual experiences, but fun experiences. So there's Yoda, and he will train you in how to use the Force. He's awesome. I'll have to send you information about this great how can I say it? The the people who make toys, sometimes they just exceed my expectations. So there's Yoda, and I want people to think of the question, are you going to choose the light side of the Force or the dark side of the Force? And I will reference, if they want to know why I think in these ways, that in my childhood, the dark side of the Force was quite present in my family, because my father, as much as he was a brilliant musician, was actually quite mentally unwell and not a happy man, and angry a lot and sometimes violent, and it was not good. And so the dark side, as they say, of the Force was present in him, and I chose to go in the other direction because I saw that it was an option. I looked at my mom, and she was like unconditional love versus conditional love. So I'll stop there, but I want people to have this fun experience of the choice before us. I also have, in the same general space, a tribute to the Cars animated movie Town of Radiator Springs, because by having that town, and it's so cute, it lights up and it's like HO scale. You've got the hippie Volkswagen bus, Fillmore, and he's living next to the conservative World War II Jeep named Sarge. And in the movie story, they are best friends who argue all the time. They don't like the same music. They don't use the same fuel. Fillmore uses organic gasoline, of course, because he's a hippie. And they argue about politics, but that doesn't stop them from being friends. And I want people to know that we have this choice, not just to choose the light side, but to also choose to be friends with people we don't agree with. And what a wonderful role model the animated Cars characters are. But there are other role models out there. Frankly, here in town, there are people who are friends with each other, and it doesn't matter what side of the fence they are on, either politically or musically or whatever other reasons people might have to get into debate.
Okay.
Phyllis, I'm going to give you a brief tour. This is the reception room where we celebrate the subject of the museum, which is that dreams can save us because they give us hope. And we have this podcast room where once a month, my friend Marilyn and I talk to people about something fun. We also have a library. We also celebrate Star Trek. We also celebrate the Ford Mustang and Craig Breedlove, who I mentioned earlier, and his efforts to beat the sound barrier. We have a Route 66 tribute, and there's a wonderful man named Angel Delgadillo from Arizona who helped bring back Route 66 tourism. We have the wonderful Earthrise photo as people enter the main room, because in the main room, where we have things for my cat, we also celebrate the space program. So there's the first step on the moon, and there's the Saturn V rocket, and there are books by astronauts and autographed, especially the Apollo Soyuz mission, a wonderful collectible autographed by Russians as well as Americans.
Oh,
And
you've
then,
got my hero there. Don't pass my hero, Walter
oh, I'm sorry,
Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite. Oh
Oh
my
my
gosh,
goodness.
saved my life by reporting on the space program after I was traumatized by the reporting on President Kennedy's assassination. So
Yes.
that gave me hope as a child that America still was doing great things, even though sometimes big tragedies occurred as well. And speaking of heroes, here's Helen Thomas, who I met in 2006
That's her
at
book. Yes.
a conference on journalism. And then here we are celebrating an amazing bicentennial effort called the American Freedom Train. So this is a diorama that a local expert helped me build recently, and we are uh, uh, giving people the dream of doing things even if they aren't famous. This was a gigantic undertaking to drive a train that was a 10-car long museum all around America for over a year. And the people who put this together, all they knew how to do was to restore steam locomotives. But they got inspired by America turning 200, and they knocked on like 50 different corporate doors, and they eventually got the money they needed to build this museum train. And if you go on YouTube, there are documentaries about the American Freedom Train. I love that ordinary people can make this kind of a difference. And now we've got the 1960s with the Summer of Love and Woodstock, and there's Janis Joplin, and there's a Barbie doll that celebrates the Summer of Love, and we have the Civil Rights movement with lots of books and pictures. We have Fred Rogers, also from the 1960s, including an autographed picture. Thank you, eBay. We have books from Buckminster Fuller. We have the beginnings of a tribute to Washington, D.C., also going to be a diorama, but there's still some work to be done there. I want people to have hope. And the last thing is, to your question, I leave it as the surprise at the end of the museum tour that there is a door that's labeled Clark Kent, and it looks just like the office of Clark Kent from the 1950s TV show that starred George Reeves. And I grew up watching that show in reruns, and I love it not just because that was my first Superman, but from a museum standpoint, it's a standalone office. That's how things were in the 1950s. In the more recent Superman movies, it's like this open space office for the Daily Planet. But I was able to build a replica of Clark Kent's office. So I say to people, you see his name on the door? You see this picture next to the door that shows what the show looked like? Guess what? And then I open the door and they get to walk into the office of Clark Kent. And I turn on the lights and I offer them a chance to sit at Clark's desk. And I've recreated it as accurately as I could. Manual typewriter, 50s style telephone, which actually works. And I say to them, imagine you were a reporter for the Daily Planet. What stories would you like to tell? Do you want to only report on bad people doing bad things, or how about good people doing good things? And then
On that note, let me ask you a question.
go right ahead.
So, one of the reasons I did this interview is because I admire your spirit.
Oh,
I
that's so kind.
admire so much that you follow your dreams no matter what's being said to you. I'm curious, how many people thought you were crazy with this idea? How many people said, Steve, this isn't going to happen? Did you have that kind of experience?
Well, nobody said it's impossible. Somebody just said, you're kind of crazy. So Jane Goodall was all about hope. And what I'm working to connect up with my local friends who said, um, go do it, Steve, but we're not quite sure we understand what you're up to. I'm going to be able to explain to them that the spirit of hope really is the core of the museum's work. And the local people, I think, will want that in these challenging times more than they did when I opened in 2023, because my sense is people are hanging in there, but there's a sadness. I don't want to say that I'm inside everybody's heads, but I know that the degree to which we are fighting, and we've now had political violence rise up again. I mean, putting aside the tragedy of when schools are attacked, we've now had famous people or one famous person be attacked. It's not good. Nobody's happy. I don't care where you're at, on which side of the scale. We have to get where we're talking to each other like Sarge and Fillmore. And even if you yell, you don't start shooting at each other. God forbid
So
we
let's
go
let's
down
let's
that
get
rabbit
people.
hole.
How often is the museum open? How often is the museum open?
Well, it's open basically 5 days a week. So people can contact the museum through its website to arrange for tours. And I'm on Main Street, and even if the museum is closed, uh, my friends know how to reach me. And if a tourist comes by and it's a day when I'm not normally open, I can still open the place. So I don't want people to feel limited. I want people to know that, especially with the centennial of Route 66 coming up, the museum is here. The museum is available. The mission of giving people hope is available. And in fact, this is something that's going to be part of its online work. I'm creating, in honor of my love of the space program. It's the American Moonshot Project, launching in 2026, a bold journey to inner space, because the spirit of adventure was fed when we went to the moon. But the spirit of cooperating instead of fighting, well, you don't get that from a moonshot to to Mars or beyond. You get that when you go inside. So that's going to be a big push the museum makes in 2026 for what I'm calling the American Moonshot Project, a bold journey to inner space, where we heal the American spirit.
Thank you so much, Steve. You never disappoint. I love your journey. Thank you for sharing it with me. Maybe I'll see you at the museum one of these days.